Welcome back to the channel. In the last video, you saw us get the car running and do a lot of wiring. But just because that's done doesn't mean we can drive the car down the road. There's still a lot more to do. So let me show you what I've been up to. I needed to figure out a solution to hook up the gas pedal inside the cabin to the throttle body on the LS engine. And for doing that, I built this contraption. Let me show you how I did it. Since the wiring to the engine has been altered from what the Firebird had stock, I no longer need some previously installed items such as the electronic throttle control doohickey thing that was damaged from the Firebird's accident anyway. I do need the cable from that to the throttle body, so I'll save that for later. I also no longer need the cruise control unit that I mounted on the left frame rail, so all this had to come out. The 4 bolts holding the fuel rails to the intake manifold have extended studs on them that aren't being used for anything. I'm sure on some other applications GM intended them for something, but I don't care about that. I'm going to use them to attach my own throttle cable bracket. These oversized washers fit nicely onto the studs, and these 10mm nuts will hold them down. This will give me a good base for the welding that is to come and will allow me to unbolt this bracket if I ever need to. You've seen me chop up these scrap pieces before to scavenge the straight rod so I can make a bracket. And you've also seen me use this metal brake to bend them to shape. And here I am using my thumb gauge to mark where it needs to be cut. These curved pieces will be put onto the washers that were previously bolted on. And I have to say that they fit quite nicely. I had no idea that the intake runners on the LS1 and the 4th-gen F-body had the exact same radius turn as the brake rotor on the rear end from that same car. What a happy coincidence. I'm only tack welding them together now and then promptly removing them to minimize the amount of heat going into the plastic manifold. I'm also fully welding them off the car to keep from throwing sparks on said manifold. After having time to cool off, I bolted them back on so I can finish building the bracket, and I really like the way they line up with the intake runners at the same angle. I am a firm believer in the quote, "Use the resources you have available." In my case, I had this electrical conduit lying around and I had an idea, or dare I say, a vision. You see, what I need is something to marry together the Camaro throttle cable coming from the gas pedal to the Firebird cable on the engine's throttle body assembly. And it will start with these pieces, which I shall refer to henceforth as pieces 1 and 2. Just a quick tip, if you ever need to mark a straight line down a piece of tubing or pipe, you can lay it in something like angle iron or this speed square and make your mark with ease. Also, if you need to drill a hole in that tubing, a punch or a nail, in this case, will make a dent that a drill bit won't slip out of. A vise would have made what I'm doing here a lot easier. Drilling this hole into piece number 1 with the largest drill bit I own proved to be pretty challenging. Oh, the frustration. But I persevered, and with sheer brute force, I managed to make it happen. The hole that was drilled into piece number 1 needs to be slightly enlarged, so that gets done with the grinder. It was also deburred with the grinder as good as possible anyway. Piece number 2 is simply getting a slot cut all the way down the middle. Piece number 1 has to be able to slide into piece number 2, which has to be made bigger around, which is what I'm attempting here. This electrical conduit turned out to be a little bit tougher than I originally thought, but I have a plan to deal with that. I'm driving the leftover conduit into piece number 2, but I know it's not going to retain the bigger shape if I take it out. So I brought it to another shop so I could borrow some fire. By heating the metal to red hot, it will relax the molecular structure of that metal, so when it cools off, it will hold the new bigger size. It should now slide off fairly easy. I forgot to drill a drain hole in piece number 1 for water to escape if it ever finds its way in there. A good stable vise is always helpful for stuff like this. I like to deburr any metal that I cut or drill on. Deburring is simply the process of removing any sharp edges left from the cutting process, and I like to be pretty thorough about it. This is a cleaning strip wheel made by 3M, who is not a sponsor of this show. This mounts in a rotary tool and can be used to strip paint without damaging the metal underneath. But it can also soften hard edges on metal and does a great job of polishing off the burnt zinc coating on piece number 2. I spent a little extra time deburring piece number 2 because I need piece number 1 to slide into it without snagging on anything. Some sandpaper was wrapped around a metal bar to get inside piece number 2 to clean the burnt zinc coating off the inside that couldn't be reached with the 3M cleaning strip wheel. As clean as I could get it, and here you see piece number 1 will slide into piece number 2 like so. Yay. The square hole from the bracket from the V6 engine needs to be cut off from the old throttle cable bracket and be repurposed onto the new throttle cable bracket. It's hard to see the 2 small tabs being held onto piece number 2 with this clamp, but this is how that square hole will be connected to piece number 2. Piece number 1 is still inside to keep the clamp from compressing piece number 2 while the tabs are tacked into place. With the clamp gone, all 4 pieces can now be welded solid. We can now remove piece number 1 from the newly welded assembly. It's just a matter of prying it up a little bit. Or if that doesn't work, we can pry it a lot. It seems to be stuck. Using a hammer on it makes me glad it's in this stable vise. If at first you don't succeed, just keep on hammering away at it until the stupid, stubborn piece comes out. I know I said piece number 2 was fully welded, but I wasn't happy with it, so some more weld went on. This hole with the bow tie shape to it is going to get trimmed off of piece number 2 now. But I'm not going to discard this piece. You're going to see it again later on in the video. And I'll simply just continue to trim up piece number 2 until it's the desired shape that I want. After a whole lot of grinding and sanding and shaping, we wind up with a nicer looking piece that looks like this. The last thing to do to piece number 2 is to cut a slot in the square hole so that I can slide the cable in later on. And of course it's going to get deburred. This piece was made by welding a metal speed nut to a metal riv nut, which some people call a nutsert. The inside diameter allows the Firebird's throttle cable jacket to fit snugly, while the speed nut allows the thin cable wire to pass through. But then I forgot to film me welding it to piece number 1. And then I forgot to point the camera at the cleanup of piece number 1. And here's what piece number 1 looks like after it's all cleaned up. We can now insert the finished piece number 1 into the finished piece number 2. Here it is. Oh, actually, here's a better look. This is what's left of the Firebird's throttle cable, and even though I've cut most of it off already, it is still too long. But that's good because the Camaro's throttle cable is way too short, due to the fact that the V6 this car came with sat all the way in the back of the engine bay, and the attachment point on the throttle assembly was on the driver's side. So now the Camaro's cable is installed in a new bracket tube, and I can mark the location on the Firebird cable where the final cut will be made. After removing the cable jacket and making that last cut, it can be installed into the metal tube and then popped back onto the throttle body. Then I can perform the finicky task of threading the cable wire back into the jacket. This is an uninsulated butt connector, the kind used for connecting electrical wires, but what I'm doing with it is passing the throttle wire through so I can create a loop that passes through the Camaro's cable and then back through the butt connector where it will be crimped tight. So we now have a single cable running from the gas pedal all the way to the throttle body. But before that can happen, you can see the purpose of making this tube in two pieces. It was done so that fine adjustments can be made before everything is locked down tight. After fiddling with the cable a little bit more, the butt connector is crimped down on the cable wire, and don't worry, it is locked in nice and tight and it will not slip out. So the excess cable wire can be cut off. The tube is then placed where it will be joined to the curve rods bolted on earlier. Some final adjustments are made before a vice grip locks the final adjustment. Now we can test it out. Wham! Wham! Vroom. Vroom, vroom. Throttle open. Throttle closed. Throttle open. Throttle closed. Throttle open. Throttle closed. Throttle open. Throttle open. Open. Closed. Open. Closed. Yeah, it works fine. And now it's time to throw more sparks on the engine. The new cable assembly wanted to lie in this position, but the back of the tube didn't quite touch the rod underneath, so I added a small piece to make up the difference. And then everything was tacked in place and the vice grip removed because this stuff ain't moving anywhere. But let's give it one more test. Wham! Wham! Open, closed. Open, closed. Yep, we're all good. This bracket will have to be removed so it can be finish welded and painted. So if the slots that I left open weren't obvious, it's this reason alone so that I can remove the cable. This rod with the captive bolt welded onto it, actually that's a nut, not a bolt, but it's going to go on top. It's going to serve as a holder for the wiring harness. I'll be able to bolt a clamp that wraps around the harness onto the back of the engine. That will keep the harness from flapping around when the engine is moving. This is the Camaro's cruise control vacuum diaphragm that operates a cable that goes to the throttle body. And I've taken this cable and threaded it through the new bracket so it can get attached as well. This bracket I'm removing holds the cable from the gas pedal. It's being removed so it can be trimmed down because the extra slot on it is where the Firebird's cruise control cable went. But that's not being used anymore, so it's got to go. So after removing the bracket and cutting off the offending slot, it's bolted back on. The little stud on the throttle body that the Firebird's cruise control cable went to, unfortunately, won't work with the Camaro's cruise control cable. So it's got to be gently cut off. The stud is not so much of a weld-in type as it is a pressed-in rivet type. So I decided to use a drill bit and a lot of patience to try to remove the stud, and as you can see, it's fighting me pretty bad. I've had experience in the past removing these kind of riveted studs before with a chisel, and I thought I would give that a shot now, but that wasn't really working well either. Since the chisel wasn't working, back to the drill bit I went, and I discovered that if I just went slow and cut slowly, I was able to get the rest of the stud out just fine. If you've been following the series, you'll remember that I modified the Camaro's transmission shifter to accept the Firebird shifter stud that operated the Firebird shifter cable. Now I'm doing a very similar thing by modifying the Firebird's throttle body to accept the Camaro's cruise control cable. I salvaged it from the Camaro's V6, and luckily it fit into the hole very snugly. And then I just welded it from the backside so it would stay in place. A paper towel soaked in water helps cool off the metal of the throttle blade shaft so we don't damage any seals with the heat from welding. And now the cruise control cable can be attached to the throttle body so that we can make sure that it will operate without the stud falling out. Do you remember the bow tie shaped hole I cut off earlier in the video? Well, here it is, slid onto the cruise control cable. This is what will hold the cable steady after I weld it to the new throttle cable bracket using some scrap metal rod. A zip tie is all that is needed to hold the rod in place so that I can make some adjustments to the rod so the bow tie hole piece can be tacked to the tube. I didn't have to remove the zip tie because it decided to jump off. Tink! After tack welding everything, the water-soaked paper towel cools everything off to prevent damage to the plastic cable. I wasn't really happy with the support this one rod gave to the cable, so the cable was removed to gain some access so another rod could be added on the other side of the hole. This rod would connect this hole piece back to the washer that I first bolted to the intake. After throwing some more sparks on the intake, you can say this bracket came full circle without actually making a circle. Well, as usual, the bracket was removed, welded up completely, cleaned up, and painted. It's then bolted back onto the engine. This one bracket serves multiple functions. It holds the throttle cable operated by the gas pedal. It also allows the cruise control cable to stay steady under use, and it will hold the wiring harness on the back of the engine. It's been a lot of work, but I think it's well worth the effort, and I think it turned out really nice. So there you have it. One throttle cable bracket. Oh yeah. As we look at this bracket that I made to fix this solution, I think about, why I don't just buy everything I need to make it work. And I could do that, but it'd be expensive, and there's plenty of other places on the car that need to have money spent. And honestly, if the best way to save money is to not spend it at all. So I hope you're enjoying this series, and I'm glad you keep coming back. So join me next time where I make more brackets.